Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 45-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Kathy, a 53-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum, and change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters, and communities.
We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present.
The Season 2 partner of The Change is Olivio Wellness Skincare, hydrating natural skincare for the over 40s.
Keep listening to the end of this episode for a discount code for your next order of Olivio Wellness products.
Hey Laura, how you going?
Not too bad, Kathy. How are you going?
Yeah, really, really good. So tell me, who have we got on today?
Well, today we have Kylee Stone. She is the founder and CEO of The Performance Code. She's presenter of the Emerging Leaders Program and host of the Uncharted Leader podcast. She is a formidable award-winning leader herself, and she's the proud descendant of the Waka and Kullili First Nations people. She's a former director of NewsCorp with 30 plus years in the business of storytelling and a career marked by operational excellence in leadership development, growth, and innovation. In 2018, Kylee stood among the 13 Indigenous leaders in business honoured with the NIDOC Because of Her We Can Award by the Queensland Government Office for Women. In 2020, during the peak of the pandemic, she led a resilience program for Qantas employees globally, earning her recognition as one of LinkedIn's top 20 voices for her thought leadership on resilience. It's like resilience is her middle name. Having 3 children in 3 years while juggling a senior leadership position, it was a pivotal turning point for Kylee, who had spent 20 years climbing the ladder only to involuntarily opt out when flexibility was no longer an option, something many of us can relate to. While she carries a litany of certifications, it's Kylie's relatable passion for the power of personal storytelling to authentically engage audiences that makes her a remarkable speaker. And as one CEO says of her impact, is quite literally the female version of Tony Robbins. She sounds damn amazing. Let's welcome Kylee Stone.
Hi Kylee, how you going?
I'm good, thank you.
That's great. We'll just get straight into it, and we're going to start with a pretty meaty question. You're a descendant of the stolen generations, and I've known you for a while, and I would describe you as an incredibly resilient woman yourself. And I think in part that comes through from the incredible resilience, let's say, from the women in your family that you are descended from. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. I think resilience somehow has become my middle name, which is certainly one of the things that I have certainly, you rightly say, received, I think, from a generation history. And so my stolen generation, some people will know, may not know, but my grandmother, Margaret, Jewel Fisher. So she was born in a location called the Waka, which was a region that was where a lot of Indigenous people were removed from their local communities and put into a settlement, pretty much. And Waka became known as the multiple area for multiple different Aboriginal cultures. So my actual great grandmother, she was Merle Kumba. So she was actually from Kullili, and Kullili was about 1,000 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, place known to locals near the Bulli River. And so she was removed from there. So I've got ancestry ties to that region. But then she was moved into what they call Waka, whereas where my grandmother was born. But when my grandmother was 3, because she looked like she was not full Aboriginal, so anyone who looked remotely half caste, as they call them, was put on a bus basically with the Salvation Army and taken away to what was deemed to be a better life, with more opportunities for education, etc. So I mean, it wasn't really it's really only been the last, say, 7 years for me that I think I've become more educated about the relationship between the impact um, on generations past. Whether you're, no
Mhm.
matter what your background, I think it was certainly a question for me at some point. People use the term like intergenerational trauma, for example, and I'd never really, although intellectually I'd say I know what that means.
Mhm.
Realistically, I was like, how does that really work? Um, but of course, it really took something, obviously, from my grandmother's point of view, and her mother, who did try to go find her when she
Mhm.
was removed, and that happened a lot for the parents. They tried to go find their children, and of course, that didn't go so well.
Mm.
They were taken back to the settlement and taken to a place called Palm Island, which most people would know, but those who don't, it was a place that you would be taken and dare I say you would not return.
Mhm.
So that was unfortunate story of my great grandmother. And of course, my grandmother was then raised, as a Western woman going to school, and she was also then part of what got called the stolen wages generation. So
Mhm.
she worked. Not only did she live with another family, but she, let's call it technically, slave trade. She
Mhm.
didn't just live with a family, she pretty much was their cleaner and cook and all the rest of it. And so that was kind of her narrative until, she up and left and married. And sadly, in her marriage, she was a victim of domestic violence and decided to go walkabout.
Mm.
And it was her kind of only way of rescuing herself, was what she knew, right? When you look back at what happened to her, what
Mhm.
do? You go walkabout. But my mother at the time of that happening, she was 5, and she had twin sisters who were 2. And so my grandfather was obviously left with the children, and he got into another relationship, remarried, and the woman he married had half a dozen children. So
Mhm.
a very big version of the Brady
Mm.
Bunch. And she had said to him, "We can't afford to take all the children. You need to put all the girls in a home." So my
Gosh.
mother and the 2 girls were removed and taken out to a country town, Canowindra, and they were raised there pretty much her entire life. So my mother stayed there from she was 5 years of age, and she left there when she was 15. And I mean, even just getting present to what that must have been like and how that shaped her in how
Mm.
she became a mother really became more obvious to me when I was going through my own journey and exploration. And it really became obvious to me when I was being interviewed, firstly, about my Aboriginality, and which was a new beginning for me in telling stories, because I was just spent my life in storytelling, not having connected the dots. And it was that first interview, and the women actually asked me about kind of the transition between my own mother and then mine, that it became obvious to me that I was the first woman in my family to not be physically removed from my
Mm.
parents. And that in itself really was quite shocking for me. And shocking because, I mean, I was born in the 70s. So I put it down to, that was the same time as the civil rights movement. It was the same time as, a lot of the women's movement. And, my mother was clearly 12 months, she was only 12 months out of the home, by the way. So she was only 16 when she fell pregnant with me. And
Mm.
I think that kind of first step of freedom for her. She was told, and the laws of the government at that time were that if you fell pregnant and you weren't married, they would take the children away from you.
Mm.
And so she was confronted with the same story with me that had happened to her, that had happened to her grandmother, sorry, her mother, etc. And so I think it was the decision she made at that point. Because I asked her, and she said, "Look, what it came down to was that I did not want to be somewhere out there in the future looking back and wondering what happened to you." She said,
Mhm.
"So even though they had said to me, if you have this child, you're not coming home," she decided that was still a better option.
Mm.
So my first few years of my life, you could say, were quite well. I won't describe it. I'll just tell you what happened. So my mum had to house pretty much just sleep on the couch where she could get a bed. And my bed at one point was the bottom set of drawers in a set of chest of drawers.
Mm.
So we pretty much she just where she could find space. That was kind of what she did for the first 3 years. And
Mm.
of course, I didn't really get clear about a lot of this until, like I said, about 7 years ago, as I started to, more of this Black movement matters, life matters, etc. There's more acceptance of, the conversation, and the more acceptance there was, the more it became, I became more curious about not just my experience of it, but my mother's experience and my mother's story and her story. And yeah, it's been quite a ride.
Mm. And
Yeah.
your mother went on to, after having you, she then went on to have more children. But if I'm remembering correctly, your mother is an emeritus professor. Is that correct?
She yes.
Wow.
So, I actually told this story. My son had we had a meeting with my son's school recently, and he's in year 12, and he's making some decisions at the moment about whether he does a
Mhm.
trade or he goes into university. He's not doing his ATAR; he's doing a trade apprenticeship, etc. And he's just navigating some challenges with that. And we were in a meeting to discuss his future when it comes to his education. I had to make it very I was trying to make it very clear to my son that it's not about which you can choose whatever path you want,
Mm.
darling. I'm just going to support whatever choose your path. But I said, and I said to the teachers, I said, look, this is not necessarily going to be the thing that you want to hear. I said, but William, I don't give a shit about school. I don't care what choice you make. Honestly, I said, my mother left at 16 and had me. I said, now look at her. She's a professor at the university. I said, so anything's possible. So, yeah, so she's got a PhD. She now works in the area of Aboriginal financial literacy. She was the first Indigenous woman to be certified with a CPA. She gets invited to speak all over the world. She's spoken in Spain, in New York. I still have to pinch myself that that's my mother, because
Mm.
somebody who's born with somebody who had a mother at 16, that's just miles apart.
Yeah.
But I'm so proud of her, what she's done to get to that point is just really extraordinary.
Mm.
Yeah, and a testament to her resilience. And also, like, I can see, having known you for some years, I can see where you get your strength and your drive and your, courage in your convictions to just like power on through and just go, like, I know this is the right thing, so I'm going to keep going, like,
Mm,
it might not be exactly perfect right now, but I'm gonna keep going. So,
yeah,
yeah,
mm,
it's really important to recognize where we came from to where we are today, I guess. Yeah,
Mm.
so that's why,
100%.
yeah, it's really important for us to understand your background and your story as to where you got today. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
look, the more I discover about my past, the more freedom I have in creating my future.
Yeah.
Which I think is a fascinating way to look at it, given that we talk about, I suppose, the topic of change. That um, I never probably appreciated the depth of that as much as I have from being able to do that work. And the more I have done it, the more freedom I experience in being able to kind of, I suppose, go into the space of the unknown, which is what change for me inevitably is about. It's like, uh, how do you do that successfully without all the resistance? And I'm like, well,
Mhm.
actually, surprisingly, the more I know about myself and my past, the more freedom I've had in being able to see what's blocking me from taking the path forward.
Kylie, so and you've got obviously you've gone on to become a mother yourself. How many children do you have?
I have three.
Yeah. And
Yes.
how do they feel about your sort of family history? It's pretty incredible stories that you've just shared with us.
Yeah. My all varied. I mean, they're teenagers at the moment, so it's been very different for each of them. And I would say, well, firstly, I've always tried to do what I thought was the right thing to do about what I do share with them at the right time. and but without really saying anything. Like my son, for example, Harrison, from a very early, right from the get-go, in fact, right from kindergarten, he would come home, and when they were asked to draw things, he would draw Indigenous coloured flags, Indigenous, like, and I was like, "Wow," like, she
Mm.
just did that. Um, my daughter, is an exceptional athlete. I mean,
Mm.
she is more resilient than me, I have to say. Like, she goes for it in everything, like, does not hold back one single bit. Like, it's like she's fearless, and in fact, I'd say that's potentially one of the traits that comes with being really resilient. You kinda learn that,
Mm.
you can be worried about things and not try things, or you can just go for it, and she's like that. She's in the NRL Tigers club for the under 17s, and she's 15, and academically she was always outstanding in her reports. And but there was a year at school, we always obviously identify, and she got invited to represent the school as one of the outstanding Indigenous, kind of aptitude. Wasn't so much about what the outcome was, but more about her attitude towards everything in life. And so I think that's kind of how it's showed up with them. Izzy loves Indigenous music, and so she's educating me a lot on that side. And then my eldest son, he's actively involved in the Indigenous programs at school, and it's really just the beginning of their learning journey,
Mm.
really.
That's wonderful, that they can see and listen and hear, your stories. And on the subject of, your storytelling, I can hear just from, I've never met you before, but it's wonderful, that we're having this conversation, and you're a great storyteller, I can tell. And it's
Mhm.
obviously part of what you do in your work life. But how has storytelling, which is, central to you and who you are, how's it kind of shaped you, and how has that changed over time?
I got a job in media. It wasn't like, it was on the radar for me. I didn't have any plans about what I was gonna do with my career, but I excelled in so I went to college, and it was honestly hit and miss. I just decided, I finished year 12, and we just went on this binge drinking fest with my girlfriend for some time, until one morning we woke up hungover, and her father said to us, "You girls need to make a decision. What you doing with your life?" Oh, like, "Oh, okay." We opened the yellow pages. What are we going to do? Because at the time, so I got into university, but at the time I was on the Gold Coast, and I didn't. This is one of the blockages that I didn't know at the time. But when I look back, I was actually too scared to leave my family to go too far. So I didn't want to go. So we opened up the yellow pages and went, "Here's a local college. I'll go check this out." So I did, and anyway, just it was really, "Oh, what's the best pick here? What should I do here?" And I'll do marketing and advertising. That seems to be more interesting than going into hospitality. I don't think I want to work in a hotel. So I did that, and my approach, I guess, when I now look at it, that period for me, I love learning. I didn't know it so much, but it would put in 200% when it came to my studies, and I topped the college across the whole lot, and I got offered a job on the spot by the marketing director at the local media company at the time, which is how I landed in media. Now, there I am in media, I suppose that's where you go for storytelling, but it didn't show up like that. That was just a job that I took. I didn't there was no job available. They just offered me a job because of my capability. So I rocked up, and they just gave me a job that they could make work. Of course, then I got bored because there wasn't really technically anything to do. And so the guy that was actually the head of the research department said to me, "Oh, well, can you help me out? Do you know how to use computers?" I lied. I was like, "Yes." Because at that stage, he had the first computer coming into the company. I mean, there wasn't a lot of computers then. So I said yes, and then I just taught myself how to do it. Anyway, the reason I tell you that is because today, when we talk about storytelling, a lot of marketing gets described as storytelling. Communication gets described as storytelling. And my role at that point was to go into the research, uncover a case or a value proposition or a narrative that could be presented to the sales teams, but to articulate it in a way that would make them very successful, so that they could go out and sell. So I did that for 4 years solid and was very effective. Couldn't tell you how I became effective at it. It just happened. And I obviously loved the fact that other people got a big kick out of their effectiveness in being able to do that. And so that's kind of what got me on that trajectory. And so I just became very exceptional at creating, narratives out of data, and I loved doing that. And but then fast forward until like 10 years ago, suddenly people are talking about storytelling. And at the same time, I had just launched a women's mentoring program, and we were building a platform. And the girl that was helping me build it, we were building it off telling the stories of women. And she said to me, "Isn't it great that you're building this storytelling platform for women? That's great that you're using your Aboriginal heritage." And I was like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about it." So, look, it's come at me in many different ways, from just organically ending up in media, the world of storytelling, being somebody who told stories using data to help create business success, and then starting a business on my own, which was based on telling other people's stories. And that was just the beginning of my kind of, I guess, seeing that actually the source of effectiveness, if we're really honest about it, was being able to tell stories that connect and make a real difference. And that was clearly what I was good at.
Connection is obviously central to everything that you do. And I know that you've had to reinvent yourself in your career and life a few times. What's your relationship with change and connection? Like, does connection play a part in change for you and storytelling, or is change separate to storytelling? Like all of
Oh,
those things.
it's all, look, it's all together. Absolutely. So storytelling, in a sense, is the pathway to enabling change, is what I'd say. And
Yep.
and that on many layers. So one of the where I became more personally invested in storytelling from a human behavior and change perspective was when I participated in a transformational program for myself, and I was in a room with about 200 other people. And whilst in that room, the transformation that occurred for us as individuals happened through people talking about their life and
Mm.
sharing stories from their life. And that was when I realized that, firstly, storytelling was way more powerful than what I had ever appreciated. You can tell a story inside of a newspaper, for example, which is what I was used to, which gives you information. But here I was impacted by the power of the power of storytelling to transform one's life. Oh my God, like this this is insane. And so for me, storytelling, connection, and change are all interwoven, because we are raised, all the stories that we create from our upbringing, we have stories of our past, and inside of those life stories, we make decisions about life, and those decisions shape who we become in life. But they're just decisions and stories. And often, if we want to change something, we have to first get that who we are today is all a creation of a story. And if we therefore want to create change and we want to create a new story, then you design the story you want to create, and then you unpack the one you've already had. So for me, it's all storytelling. It's just all
Yeah.
of it. And if you want to go, I've often said to some of my clients, as a coach, to help them understand what I mean, I've often said to them, "Look, I understand you have a particular view about who you are and what you think's possible about your life. I totally get that." And I've had one guy, right? He was a guy, so I was working with a sales guy at Google, and he was looking to elevate his performance as a leader inside of the company and take a promotion. And we were talking about the value of identity and story. And I said, look, you have a view about who you are and what you think's possible. I said, but quite frankly, I said, you can come here and tell me that you want to be an astronaut.
Mm.
And you could be an astronaut. I said, simply by creating a narrative called, I'm creating that I'm an astronaut. And then you would take actions that are consistent with what an astronaut would create. But that's all started from the creation of a story around that. Same thing. I said, you could equally tell me you want to be a ballerina. You know, you create a story about what that looks like for you, and you can then take actions that do it. So change starts with the creation of a story that inspires you to move forward. And whenever there's resistance to change, it's because somehow someone hasn't been connected to that inspired new future and they cannot see that. And if they cannot see that, they get stuck. And it's
Mm.
not like they, that's for myself as well, by the way.
I was going to say, does change scare you?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And I'm a master at it. So I think I have to say yes, right? Because I'm human. And even though I'm masterful at seeing it, I'm still human. And one of the things that I know to be true for myself and every human being on the planet is that we are all afraid all the time. And for me to say I'm not scared would be just a lie. I have to assume yes. Even if I look like I'm not, I have to assume yes, because if I do not, I don't go looking for what are the potential alterations that I would take. Because if I just say, no, I'm not afraid, I'll take an action that will just go into overdrive and I'll just forcibly make it happen. That's how I've done it before. If I acknowledge the fear, then I can look from a place that's going to be more empowering rather than a default way to go about it.
Yeah. And
Mm.
I guess when you acknowledge the fear, you can also sort of mitigate any risk that might be in your way, that sort of you go, oh, well, hang on, that's going to be a block, or that's going to be a block. I need to acknowledge those things are there. I still want to do the change, even though it's scary.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is that that's the part of being human that's inauthentic. So fear is not real, but fear is very real inside of our brains. So it's an automatic process, but I do it because it gives me a place to then acknowledge what's automatic in the wiring of my brain. And it allows me to see what potential things would become an obstacle for me. But then once I do that, I then can acknowledge, oh, that's right, fear is not real. It's all made up. It's all a decision that you made from when you were 5 years old and you decided you had to be a certain way in order to protect yourself. That's not real. And then I stand back and then I look from the creation of something beyond my own interpretation.
Yeah, so that's so interesting. And Kylie, you said something just then that I just wanted to reflect on about creating a story, because I feel like, and maybe this is me, but I think it's up for a lot of women in midlife. We're kind of at this weird junction or point in our lives where lots of women are struggling with where they're at, whether perhaps they haven't achieved what they wanted to by now. Kathy and I, we've had lots of conversations about that. You get to 40 or 50 and you go, is this it? Is this where I need to be? What can I do? And so if you're talking to me as one of your leadership clients, and I come to you and I want to create a story for myself going forward for my third act, my second act, whatever we want to call it. How
Mm.
can I start? What advice would you have for someone like me who is facing change and is fearful? What's the first steps we might need to take?
Yeah. So one of the best things about being human is our imagination. And, I think if we often think of storytelling as a child, right, we tell kids the stories, we read stories all the time, and it's all imagination. That's what kids love about it.
Mm.
So the value and the opportunity for women, which for anyone, but let's talk specifically to navigating that change and wanting to create that whole new future, is to use what I've called, actually, I didn't call it this. So I've done some research around it. It's called the Merlin principle, which is Merlin was a character, wizard, a magical wizard that was with King Arthur, and King Arthur was obviously the fighter, but the Merlin was there designed to give him wisdom that he couldn't see. So how do you tap into the greater wisdom beyond yourself based on what you're dealing with? So if you've got, no matter what crisis you're dealing with, how can I step back and, let me just tap into what Merlin might say? So in tapping into that imagination, what I often will do with the client, and I do this with my emerging leaders program too, is I get them to imagine for a moment that they're stepping into a time capsule, and they're going to use the Merlin principle, which is to some wizard is going to cast on you wisdom beyond your years, and you're going to now it's 3 years in the future. You're in this time capsule. I want you to imagine it's 3 years in the future today. So if today's the 1st of April and it's 2024. Well, what if it was now the 1st of April and it's 2027? What does life look like for you? What if every dream you ever had to come true could come true and magic happens? What do you see? And surprising, well, probably not surprisingly, but certainly at first, I wasn't really sure the depth to which it would occur because I can't see in somebody else's brain. But what I do know for sure is the second you give people the space to do that, they go beyond all the crisis because 3 years out, apparently, is far enough away that they know that they can get beyond the current crisis, but it's not too far away that it's impossible. So when you go to that timeline and you ask them to look at life as if you're there right now, and then start telling me the story of your life right now, and they will describe to you exactly how they want life to look. Now, from that point, you really then just got to go down. You could call it a different channel, right? You go one channel. What does your physicality look like? What is your health and your body and your vitality and what do you look like? When you see that best version of yourself, and then same too with your careers. Like, what is the future use? And I did this for myself, which is how I made the change to go from 25 years in media and marketing to now being a leadership coach and educator. Was I sat there and I went, in 10 years time, I do not want to be here. I do not want to be on the trajectory for doing the same technical skill 10 years older, because quite frankly, if I did, I would be out of a job, because as a marketer, they're just going to keep paying the younger ones and I'm going to be out of it anyway. So
Yeah.
and you should know, for me, it really took some time to do the thinking, because when I started looking, where I was automatically looking from was what I already knew. Okay, what can I do based on my skill set? What can I do based on what I've already done in my career? It took me getting out of that pattern of thinking to really explore something beyond that. And I will never forget the moment that it first came. And I was driving in the car and I rang a good friend of mine and I said, "Oh my God, I've got it." I said, this is bizarre actually that we're having this conversation. I actually said, "I'm going into change. I'm exiting out of corporate out of marketing and strategy. I'm going into change." 5 years later, I was in the head of change and strategy planning for NewsCorp, ended up in transformation, and there you go. So
Wow.
using our imagination and teleporting our future into what it looks like 3 years from today, but then you got to act like that is real right now.
Yeah.
And then you take actions being that human being right now.
Yeah. So
And mostly what it becomes about is it's a human being, not a human doing. And so when you live life from that is present right now, what it allows you to do, and this is exactly for me, each day I get up and I create my intention of who I am and what I'm committed to inside of a way of being. For me, ultimately, it was about being courageous. But to be courageous, I would have to then start taking courageous actions. And it was in that way that suddenly those changes just naturally occurred.
Yeah. I think sometimes we can't get out of our own way, or we struggle. Not can't. We absolutely can get out of our own way, but we get stuck in the thought, if I do this, I won't earn this much money. Or if I do this, people might get upset with me. Or if I do this, like, if I go back to work, for some women, they might have been, stay-at-home mum for extended periods of time. If I go back to work, the impact on all the other people will be greater. And so we push aside what actions we really want because we're concerned about the impact that those actions might have on others. And that's not to say that we shouldn't care about those impacts on other people, but we can't stop who we are and the change that we want in our lives because we're afraid of how it might show up and how other people might get upset because we've ruffled their feathers or we've changed the dynamics or shifted those paradigms a little bit, whether it be the family dynamics, not being home all the time or not being as accessible, or all of a sudden the teenage kids might need to make their own dinners or whatever because we have made different choices.
Yeah, that was the biggest one. Look, that is all the way through my journey, which is why as I look back, I've looked back for myself and gone, how could I not impact that change as quickly as I think I could have when I look at it on paper? And that's because for those reasons, there was a lot of things in my, unpacking in my own blocks and beliefs. I think it's all just wedded in our own beliefs, but for me, the fundamental one was a fear that a couple of ones. It was twofold. First one was it doesn't matter what I do; it's not going to make any difference anyway.
Mhm.
So that one just would cut me off from making the change because then I would hold back and not do it. So I'd automatically then look at all the reasons why it wouldn't work. And the other one was my fear of not being loved,
Mm.
which was prevalent with my children. Um, and I was what I did wasn't conscious of the time that was in the background was my fear that they would hate me.
Mm.
And if
Mm.
I did certain things and they would hate me for doing it, so then I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't want to behave. But I could not see that. It wasn't
Mm.
obvious to me to start with.
Yeah, and
Mm.
that's a big one, right? Like,
Mm.
especially for women that are mothers, the worst thing that we could possibly have is that our children could hate us. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then I realized, it's not us. The most empowering thing for me was to realize that all of those narratives were not even mine. They are from the social conditioning of
Mm.
the world that we live in. So my automatic way of thinking and looking comes from the way we're raised, right? It's just the way that human beings are designed. So we've lived in a world, and this is the conflict, I suppose the paradox for me as an Indigenous woman, which is why I now do this work, is because it's the same with leadership. We've been raised in a world that looks a particular way, leadership is a particular way, and therefore we act and take actions that can continue to perpetuate that path. But as an Indigenous person, that's not the same path. Leadership is a very different thing. So it's not true, but it's the same for women. I've been raised a particular way. I had an experience that I had, with my own mother and my own upset that my mother was not around when I was growing
Mhm.
up. And then the decisions that I would make as a young girl that I was never going to be like that. So, of course, what did I do? I made sure I never did that. Quit
Mm.
my corporate career once I had the three kids and not knowing at the time that it was wedded to my concern about not being available for my children. But that wasn't mine either. That was just because I was,
Yeah.
making decisions based on my own experience with my mother. And so it's not until I unpacked all of that and got, that's not true. None of that's true. That they're not going to have that reaction. It wasn't until I saw that I could take a different action.
Yeah. It's huge, isn't it, really?
Oh, huge.
That kind of leads us into our last-ish question. Um, First of all, like, really, in a few words or less, um, are there any changes still left for Kylie, big or small? And then leading off from that, what are your feelings around menopause, perimenopause, the menopause, the change, whatever, wherever you're at, in that journey? Yeah.
So, firstly, the big change for me right now, one that I've been actually kind of going through quite slowly for the last 5 years, is separation. So, I was
Mhm.
been married for 20 years, together with my husband for 25 years, and
Wow.
it's taken. We still live together,
Mm.
and I'm just about to, we are going through a process at the moment. We're trying to work out the actual logistics of that separation and, the nuts and bolts of it, so to speak. And it's taken a long time, again, because of one of the things that I was stuck with was the concern that I couldn't do it. How do I do this? I can't do this. I can't do this, etc. And so that is perhaps the biggest one. I've known myself for the last 25 years as being in a relationship. I've made my decisions to support even the decision making that I have had in that relationship has been a path that hasn't been my own, which is, that's all on me. But now I'm like, there's a twofold concern. Number one is, oh my God, how do I navigate that life for myself? And there is a lot of intricacies that come with that financially and physically and etc. And at the same time, there's a whole new opening of opportunity, like, oh my God, am I really going to want to date again? And oh yes. I mean, all of those things at the moment are all coming at me, I'm like, all coming at me. So big changes for me. Um, and then the menopause one, well, maybe that's also why it's taken me 5 years to navigate this change, considering I'm on the other side of menopause. But I went through perimenopause in my early 40s. And then I went through the final stages of menopause during COVID,
Oh
Yeah.
gosh,
which wasn't
the
obvious to me
combo.
until, yeah. And it wasn't obvious because there was so much else going on. I was like,
Mm.
it was all the other stuff going on. But what made it clear that that was what was happening is because I made no changes. 2017, off the back of being diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, I had taken sugar out, taken alcohol out, I'd gotten fit, I'd lost, was that 40? Anyway, I lost a lot of weight as a result of that. And my journey ever since then has been to ensure that I eat clean and take good care of my body. So there I was going into COVID, feeling really great about myself physically
Mhm.
and mentally. And then all of a sudden, going through COVID, I was like, where's this weight coming from? And it was all in areas I'd never experienced weight gain before, around my abdominal and around my arms. And, I have, look, I'm not somebody who's necessarily concerned with body image per se. I've always been rather big around my backside and, but the arms and the waist was never. I'm like, that's where I was always tiny, right? And suddenly I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And of course, then I Google and I go, oh, okay, cortisol, menopause, blah, blah, blah. Right. So I don't know. Look, when I go, my view on menopause, I think the most important, I think the fact that there's the word pause in it, I think is a key. I think
Yep.
it's a symbol to us to say it's time to pause.
Mm.
And my way of actually successfully navigating that, such that I'm now on the other side and I'm, I gym. So every 2 days, my routine with my fitness is I do 2 days weights, then I do swimming, 2 days weights, swimming, 2 days weights, swimming. And I meditate daily, I tap daily. But it's all for me about the pause,
Yep.
Mm.
breathing and breathing and breathing. Because in society, we get to that stage of our life and we are burnout, stressed, do. Let's just not do. Let's just pause.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really great advice, I think, for everyone. We can all learn from that to pause, especially around this time of life where it's busy and we need to take that moment for
Yes.
ourselves. Yeah, to pause and reflect. Kylie, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on The Change and sharing your amazing insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Kylie certainly given me a lot to think about, Kathy. Yeah, I feel I could listen to Kylie for quite a long time. She's got a lot to say and she's very clearly a professional in her field. What was your sort of main takeaways?
Look, having known Kylie for a number of years,
Mm.
I always am inspired and challenged by
Mhm.
Kylie. She challenges me to get out of my own way, to really acknowledge that if something if I'm scared of something or if I don't want to change something or if um perhaps I'm hesitant,
Mm.
possibly something in that for me like, that I need to really work on and think about. So yeah, that's my big takeaway that I mean, I make no secret, change is my kryptonite. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that I really just want to be loved. And I really just am scared of rocking the boat because I've got this fear that if I rock the boat or if I change too much or if I change too much about myself, then people won't love me and they won't want me around. So, yeah. What about
Mm.
you?
No, that's you've gone deep quick there, Kathy. I I do relate to that as a chronic people pleaser. I absolutely know what you're saying there, where you just want you just want to be feel the love and not rock the boat and not be like, the ultimate thing for a people pleaser is you just want to be good, a good girl. That's sort of where I
Yeah.
certainly feel, yeah, and that being difficult or bossy is were the words that you just didn't want to be described as, certainly as a woman or as a girl. So I relate to that, those feelings. I think from the perspective of Kylie, what I felt when I was listening to her, some of the things I noted down was her way of thinking about our lives in 3 years' time as a kind of starting point. So when I asked her the question about, what's the first step that I need to do in order to get out of my own way, like you say, um, get thinking about where I want to be in 3 years. It's very precise, which I liked.
Mhm.
It's good to have a precise idea as opposed to something wishy-washy, or too long term. Like 10 years is too big. It's too long, especially at our age. 10 years feels very, a very long way away. Whereas 5 also, but 1 too short. 3 is doable. It's manageable. I can totally, yeah. I thought that was very good. I like those sorts of tips where it's like, just do this. Think of 3 years and where do you want to be? And then tell yourself the story and create that story, that narrative. And she kept coming back to those words that we use as well. Storytelling. It's such a media buzzword of the now, but I like it because I think that it goes beyond just simple kind of advertising media speak, and it is about people at the heart of the story. And I really thought that was yeah, a really good insight that I plan to use. I'm going to go and think about where I want to be in 2027. That was my
Mhm.
main takeaway.
And using storytelling to really create that connection, and I think
Mm,
that that's what we're doing here with the change is really about creating those connections for other women to feel
mm,
seen and heard, to
mm,
know that it's scary,
mm,
but it's doable, because other women have done it before us. So I think I'm going to also perhaps not visualize where I'm gonna be in 3 years because I'm not sure. Like,
mm,
I don't know, at this point, I'm not sure what changes I need to make or I want to make. But I'm going to find that Merlin voice.
I
That
like that too. Yeah.
mm,
A wizard.
my little
Yeah.
wizard voice that's sort of going to give me some guidance, around, and maybe the guidance is around what do I want?
Mm,
Where do I wanna be in 3 years? Because
mm,
I'm not sure. Like,
mm.
I'm not sure. Do I wanna be on my Euro vacation? Like, is that what I
Mm.
want for 3 years?
Well,
I don't
that
know.
sounds lovely. But also,
Mhm.
it's perhaps, and she sort of alluded to this too, it's not always, and I need to think about this as well. It's not just about what I want to be doing, it's who I want to be, like, as
Mm,
a person. How do I want to feel? All those questions that are sensible to ask yourself on a regular basis and think about and give yourself that time. And she has that obviously intentional practice where she does that daily and she meditates and she thinks about those things. So I absolutely know I need to bring that into my life a little bit more. And yeah, she was a very inspirational guest and someone with a very interesting personal story, which I also was really intrigued by. And I think that those stories of her mother and her grandmother and her great grandmother and that intergenerational trauma that she spoke about, and how her mum's been amazing in kind of just
yeah,
like breaking that cycle. And it's an incredible story from both her and her mum's perspective, I thought.
absolutely, and as
Mm.
you say, that human being as opposed to human doing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Really liked that
Mm.
sense of what do I want to be or who do I want to be
Who, that's right.
rather than what do I want to do.
Yeah.
Because we can all do stuff,
Yeah.
but is the doing of the stuff who I want to be as a person? Lots of thoughts.
Lots of thoughts, and that's why we do The Change, because we love to have interesting conversations with women who make us have lots of thoughts that will hopefully help us. Yeah, and help you too. So, yeah, that was a really, really great chat. It was lovely to talk to Kylee, and thank you for introducing us to her.
No worries at all. Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast.
We love the Australian-made, all-natural skincare brand Alivio Wellness, and we know you will too.
Use code THECHANGE at the checkout to receive 20% off your next order. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.